So here's my goal with you tonight. I want to spend a brief period of time giving you a sense of how I am defining the problem and how I am attempting to define the beginning of the solution. My hope is that that will solicit from you a tremendous amount of feedback from which I will learn, and we can help each other through the next hour through a process that is going to require 311 million of us to actually figure out how it is we're going to align our interests, even though we're all completely different from each other, in a way that we have a set of common goals, specifically matching investment to entrepreneurship and development, matching health services and health services industry activity to health, matching educational investment and educational activity to learning, and matching energy resource management to the awareness that efficiency is actually the only fuel that is of significance at this point and will be on the earth from now on, as opposed to getting lost in the insanity of a lot of the debates that we get lost in. Why did I write that book is the first question that I would like to answer from myself to you. I wrote this book because when I left CNBC, when I was at CNBC, and certainly when I was at Bloomberg, I was of the belief that there was a basic level of integrity in our investment and capital markets as a country that led to a rational need for a debate about what we should do with investment dollars across the board, on the belief that because there was a rational marketplace and real integrity in that marketplace, that the way we invest money would respond in a fashion that is beneficial to society. It became very apparent, particularly through 2007 and 2008, that because there was a really disastrously corrupting industry that developed, which was basically a credit insurance fraud, where we allowed the selling of insurance on bonds, on car loans, on home loans, and these types of things, that the creation of this insurance market where you could sell insurance, which is advantageous to the consumer because it makes the cost of your payments on whatever you're buying cheaper, and it's advantageous to the politicians because it makes it easier to placate the electorate in the short term by virtue of making the things that you want to buy cheaper, that in so doing, what was not disclosed to us or what we didn't understand or appreciate or didn't care about was that we were allowing the sale of this insurance without actually forcing the people selling the insurance to have the necessary capital to sell it. So imagine if you could sell insurance on, Washington Monument. I'll stand there all day just collecting checks. Like, this thing could fall down at any time. Better buy some insurance. But then when it falls down, I don't have to pay the claims. Well, effectively, we've created that as a pricing apparatus for the price of everything on Earth. I mean, the underlying premise in this book really is that everything that we on this planet is at the wrong price, right? Because of the breach in integrity that is being created by virtue of the relationships that we get into between businesses and the government. So the first thing is, once that became apparent to me, I then had the opportunity to leave CNBC and go to MSNBC to learn more about the legislative process, the legislative debate, and the whole nature of the interaction in policy making, et cetera. And it was a crash course because the first thing that happened was healthcare, even though I thought it was going to be banking since we were in the middle of a banking crisis, but apparently the banking crisis is not an issue when you can print a bunch of money and pretend it's not a crisis. And then you're like, okay, well, we solved that one with by printing $30 trillion against our reserve currency, but that's crazy. But that's fine. So now we're going to do healthcare. I'm like, okay, listen, healthcare is a valid thing. We really need to talk about that. There's a tremendous number of misaligned interests. The fee-for-service model creates all of the wrong incentives in terms of medical practice insofar as it incentivizes, obviously, not just testing, but when you add to it the issue of tort liability, it also makes doctors test excessively, either because there's a profit motive and or because there's an avoidance of litigation motive. Beyond fee-for-service, you have a monopoly private health insurance business that has an exemption from the antitrust laws that date back to Teddy Roosevelt, which is insane. You have a monopoly drug providers. Everybody knows this stuff. So like, okay, we can do healthcare, it's great. So the debate ensues, and I'm like, oh, well, obviously we're going to have to deal with it. Employer-based health care goes back to Eisenhower, and now we have this adaptive economy. People need to be able to move. And obviously, your employer should not be responsible for your health care. It's totally insane. People can't change jobs because they're afraid of losing their health care at a time when people need to change jobs constantly because we're at this incredible rate of change in our country. And so I was excited for the debate, only to watch $600 million show up. The WellPoint executives get staff jobs on Max Baucus's staff. And the WellPoint executives write the legislation for Max Baucus that was ultimately presented to the system, which was well played politically in that it at least achieved the politically low-hanging fruit of saying we should give more people health care. Fully agree. But instead of resolving the how we do that by looking at the why is it so expensive, why are our health statistics so bad, why is diabetes so high, all these things that are just facts in our country, looking at modern problem solving, which you talk about in the book. Did you know that 5% of the American population is responsible for 50% of our healthcare costs? That's not because that 5% is bad people. It's because the demand for healthcare is different depending on how old you are as a human being. There's a naturally misaligned interest in healthcare, if you want to use a free market narrative, because young people and older people have more demand for healthcare. And those who aren't of those ages will have the same demand for healthcare when they get to that age. But none of this gets discussed. $600 million shows up. Coverage is expanded, which is politically attractive, and basically a mandate is placed into a rigged monopoly private health insurance system with a rigged monopoly private drug system, and we're told that our problems have been solved, which left me scratching my head. Next year, I'm like, okay, we're going to do banking. This is my bread and butter. Right now, I'm like, listen, healthcare, I had to figure it out a little bit. Banking's what I do. Obviously, we're going to need to put the swaps market on an exchange so that we can have some transparency. It's the only market in the world that's not on an exchange. It's the most simple thing in any free market or capitalist system is that you don't have a dark securities market worth $700 trillion that allows the 20 people, basically the largest financial institutions in the world, to use the threat of catastrophic disruptions to energy supplies, food supplies, real estate lending, et cetera, as leverage to force the government to print money to pay out into a $700 trillion casino that nobody can see what's what. That seems crazy. Don't do it. Obviously, we don't need to have 4 financial institutions controlling the vast majority of all the wealth in this country by virtue of not only their consolidation, but then their benefit from our own government giving them money at 0% that they then lend back to us for 3%. That's the best business model in town. We all got to get that deal. The rest of this is hard work. Imagine you could just borrow money for 0% every month and then lend it back for 3% to the government. That's the business model for these institutions. None of that was resolved. $600 million showed up again. The number seems to be around 600 million, by the way, if you're wondering what it takes to make sure nothing happens. Whatever it might be, which is pretty cheap because you consider, I mean, you know, these people are making hundreds of billions of dollars, so you're talking less than 1% easy of your operating overhead just to make sure that nothing gets screwed up. And so that led me to go to the point where I wanted to attempt to write this book. And the point of the book is very simple, which is to say, I don't know what to do. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I don't know what to do. But I do know that if we do not talk about specific issues and the intention of that system, we have a banking system and a publicly chartered banks and a support system for those banks for a very specific reason in this country, the same way we have special exemptions for police to carry guns. Not everybody gets to carry a gun. Cops get to carry guns. We let cops carry guns because we rely upon them to provide security to us in that relationship. We give banks special charters and special privileges and special assets because we expect them to facilitate the lending and investment of money into our country. If you want to wildly speculate with money, that's totally fine. You should do it with your own money. There's no reason for the US taxpayer to be on the hook to fund what is effectively online gaming, but it's online gaming with the blackmail leverage of saying if you get rid of the online gaming, then we're going to take away the food, the oil, and the housing. You're like, well, we better give them the money. That's the sort of thing that we need to be talking about. We need to be talking about the misaligned interests in our healthcare system. I just gave a brief inventory of it. We need to be talking about the misaligned interests in energy and in education. All of these systems really suffer from a lot of the same base dysfunction in decision making, which is how do we create the appearance in the short term of some sort of viable benefit for this, and then transfer the significant risk of the failure in the healthcare system, failure in the educational system, failure in the banking system, failure in our energy systems to a future date and away from us and to somebody else. That's the definition of a greedy bastard. A greedy bastard is not